Hello guys. Close your eyes and imagine the quiet hush of a medieval monastery after dark. The year is early 1200, and you find yourself within the thick stone walls of a secluded abbey. The world outside is silent and distant. In the cool midnight air, the cloisters are dimly lit by a few flickering lamps, their glow trembling against cold carved pillars. The flagstone floors beneath your feet are chilled, and your breath makes a faint mist as you walk silently through a corridor. You're wearing a simple wool robe that barely keeps the night's chill from your bones. If you find comfort in these quiet journeys through the past, feel free to like and subscribe. It helps more than you know. Also, I'd love for you to share in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is there right now. It's always so interesting to see how far and wide these quiet moments reach. Inside the dormitory, a long hall of narrow beds, you and dozens of other monks have only just laid your heads down to rest. Your bed is little more than a thin straw mattress resting on wooden boards. A humble wool blanket is drawn over you, and a small straw-filled pillow supports your head. It isn't comfortable by any stretch, but after a long day of labor and prayer, even this rough bed offers some relief. As you pull your wool hood low over your shaved head for a bit of extra warmth, you can feel the coarse fabric against your skin. The top of your head is bare. All monks keep their crown shaved in the distinctive tonsure, a circle of scalp exposed as a sign of humility. With the hood up, only a fringe of hair around your ears remains uncovered, and even that does little to keep you warm. The winter night air seeps in through the stone walls, and despite your fatigue, the cold makes it hard to sleep deeply. Still, your eyelids grow heavy. In the darkness, a profound silence hangs, the kind of deep, heavy quiet only found in a place far removed from the world. Just as you begin to drift into a shallow sleep, a distant bell breaks the silence. Its sound is soft but insistent, echoing down the vaulted corridors. The bell is ringing for Matins, the first prayers of the new day, called at this ungodly hour in the middle of the night. In this monastery, like all others following the Rule of Saint Benedict, the day's cycle of worship actually begins long before dawn. You inhale deeply, already accustomed to this routine. There will be no full night's sleep for you. There never really is. Around you in the darkness, you can hear the gentle rustle of your brothers in their beds as they too rouse themselves. Some might sigh quietly or clear their throats, but no one speaks a word. Strict silence is observed during the night. You rise from your hard bed, body stiff and still aching from yesterday's labors. The chill immediately bites at any bare skin as you swing your feet to the floor and slip them into your simple leather sandals. In haste, you wrap your robe tighter around yourself. There's no time to tarry. The abbot expects everyone to be prompt. The tolling bell is like a command from above, one that you have vowed to obey without hesitation. Within a minute or two, you and the other monks form a somber, sleep-dazed procession through the dark halls. Each monk carries a small lantern or a thick beeswax candle, its flame sputtering in the cold draughts. The faint light reveals glimpses of your surroundings as you proceed: arches of stone above, the outline of doorways leading to the cloister garden beyond, a statue of the Virgin Mary casting a long shadow. The air smells of stone, wax, and a hint of smoke from the earlier evening's hearth in the distant kitchen. Your sandals shuffle softly on the stones. No one speaks, even if someone wanted to complain about the frigid night or their weariness. The vow of silence forbids casual words, especially at this hour. As you make your way to the church for Matins, you pass through the cloister walkway. The cloister is an open arcade surrounding a small courtyard, and as you shuffle along one side of it, the night sky is visible above the courtyard's garden. You steal a glance upward. Countless stars glint in the clear, cold sky of early winter. The moon is a thin crescent tonight, offering very little light. The stars and the faint glow of your fellow monks' lanterns provide the only illumination. It's beautiful in a way. The silent night, the ancient stones, the line of hooded figures gliding through darkness. But it's also so very cold. You draw a long breath and see the faint fog of it as you exhale. In moments like this, it hits you how far removed you are from the comforts of ordinary life. While most people are deep in their warm beds at this hour, you are awake and duty-bound to pray. Entering the abbey's church, you feel a wave of even colder air, trapped in the vast, unheated space. High vaulted ceilings disappear into darkness above. The church is almost completely dark, save for a few oil lamps and candles that barely illuminate the stone columns lining the nave. Your breath catches from the chill, and you can see faint clouds forming as the brothers exhale in unison. Each monk moves to his assigned place in the choir stalls, wooden benches that face each other in 2 long rows flanking the chancel. You find your place and remain standing for a moment. Some of your brothers wrap their woolen cowls tighter or rub their hands discreetly for warmth. You can imagine each of them fighting off drowsiness, just as you are. The silence is profound as the last echoes of footsteps fade. The abbot or the prior gives a quiet signal, perhaps just a nod, and matins begin. In the pitch dark of night, voices emerge from the silence, chanting the first psalm of the service. The sound is low and soft at first, a collective murmur that gradually gains clarity and strength. Latin words flow in plainsong chant from the monks' lips. They intone the familiar opening verse of the office, Domine labia mea aperis, O Lord, open my lips, and my mouth shall proclaim your praise. The response comes from the opposite side of the choir, and soon the 2 sides alternate the verses of the psalms, back and forth, in a steady, hypnotic rhythm. There are no instruments, no accompaniment, just human voices echoing in a cavernous stone church. In the dimness, you strain to focus on the Latin texts. You've sung these same psalms countless times before. In fact, the entire book of Psalms is cycled through the prayers every week, so you know many of the verses by heart. Yet at this hour, after only a few hours of rest, your mind wanders and your eyelids droop. You blink hard, trying to stay attentive. It would be a grave offense to fall asleep in the middle of prayers. A young monk near you sways slightly where he stands, fighting off the urge to doze. One of the senior monks notices and will surely report it later. The chant continues, each psalm followed by another in a long sequence. Matins is the longest of the prayer services. It can last for an hour or more, especially on feast days when extra readings are added. In this pre-dawn office, there are also readings from Scripture or the lives of saints. A designated reader steps forward with a lantern and reads a passage in Latin. You try to absorb the holy words, but the cold and fatigue make it hard to concentrate. You shift on your feet to stay awake, feeling the ache of standing on the hard stone floor. The candles flicker as a draft passes through the church. Somewhere in the darkness above, an owl hoots from the belfry, or perhaps a night bird perched on a high window. The chanting goes on. The melodies are familiar, soothing in their repetition, and that makes it even harder not to nod off. You silently clench your cold fingers together inside your wide sleeves, focusing on the slight pain to keep alert. At times your stomach rumbles softly. You had only a scant evening meal yesterday, and the next food will not come until midday today, many hours from now. Hunger is a common companion during these early hours. Yet you remind yourself that this sacrifice of sleep and comfort is your offering to God. The Rule of Saint Benedict, the guiding code for monastic life written hundreds of years ago, prescribes this routine as a discipline of obedience and piety. After what feels like an eternity of psalms and readings, Matins finally draws to a close. The last psalm is sung, and then all the monks join in chanting a closing hymn of praise. The deep voices fill the church, and for a moment you feel a stirring of warmth in your chest despite the cold. The spiritual beauty of the chant can sometimes cut through your physical discomfort, and you sense the centuries of tradition in each note. When Matins ends, Lauds immediately follows, the next set of prayers that essentially continues the night office right into the break of day. By now, a faint hint of pale gray shows through the high windows. Lauds is shorter, perhaps half an hour, comprising more psalms and hymns specifically meant to welcome the coming dawn and praise God for the new day. The word lauds itself means praises. You continue chanting with your brothers, voice hoarse and breath visible in the cold air. Some lines you sing out strongly, others barely above a whisper as fatigue weighs down every limb. At last, Lauds 2 is completed. A gentle sense of relief sweeps through you. The most taxing duty of the night is over. The sky outside is just starting to lighten to a deep blue. It must be around 4 or 5 in the morning now. The community files out of the church silently, just as they entered. If it were summer, the sun might already be peaking above the horizon at this time, but in winter it's still dark. As you step back into the cloister, a pale glow outlines the eastern sky. The stars have begun to fade. The bell that summoned you earlier is quiet now, having done its job. Now there is a brief window of time before the next prayers. Depending on the monastery's custom, you might have a short rest or some private meditation at this point. In some abbeys, monks return to their beds for an hour or two of additional sleep if the night office ends very early, especially in winter when dawn comes late. But often, by the time Matins and Lauds are finished, there is not much point in going back to bed. The day is about to begin in earnest, so you remain awake and perhaps shuffle back to the dormitory or the cloister to stay warm and occupy yourself quietly. The Rule of Saint Benedict emphasizes that idleness is the enemy of the soul, so even these in-between moments are usually filled. You might sit on a bench in the cloister where the first chilly light of dawn creeps in and do some reading by candlelight. Each monk has a sacred text or a theological book assigned to him for study. You pull a small Latin prayer book from inside your robes, one of the few items you carry, and try to focus on the words. Your fingers are numb as you turn the pages of parchment. Sometimes, as you struggle to read in the dim morning light, the words blur and your mind drifts. You have to shake yourself lightly to stay awake. Some monks quietly pace back and forth in the cloister walk, lips moving silently as they recite memorized prayers or contemplate the day's scripture. Not long after, the bell rings again, a clear peal that cuts through the dawn. It is time for prime, the next canonical hour of prayer, traditionally observed at sunrise. You gather once more with your brothers in the church, which is now faintly lit by the growing morning light through the eastern windows. Prime is a relatively short service, a collection of a few psalms, a hymn and a reading meant to sanctify the early morning. It might only last 15 minutes or so. Standing there in the now fully daylight-lit church, you feel the stiffness in your knees from kneeling and standing so much already. But prime passes quickly. The chants for prime are cheerful, praising the light of day and asking for God's guidance in the work to come. The Latin phrases roll off your tongue almost automatically at this point. On most days, a low mass is celebrated in the church after prime, offering the community the Eucharist and a moment of extra grace before work begins. The monks stand in quiet devotion as one of the fathers, priest monks, leads the simple liturgy at the altar. Holy Communion might be received only on Sundays or special feasts, but the daily Mass still nourishes your spirits. When it concludes, the monks depart the church and head to their assigned tasks. With prime completed, the monks disperse to begin the day's work. The sun has finally edged over the horizon, sending pale golden light across the frost-covered cloister garth, the central courtyard garden, You notice the glitter of frost on the winter herbs and the thin ice on the surface of the fountain basin at the cloister's center. It's a beautiful morning, but the beauty is something you can only briefly acknowledge. There are tasks awaiting you. By rule, a monk's day is balanced between prayer and labor, or et labora as the saying goes, pray and work. After hours of ora, now comes the labora. Each monk has an assigned job or obedience within the monastery, given by the abbot or prior. Some will head to the fields and gardens to tend vegetables, grains, or vineyards owned by the abbey. Others will work in the kitchen preparing the simple meals, or in the bakehouse, baking the daily bread. A few may go to the scriptorium, the writing room, to copy manuscripts or do administrative writing. Everyone has something to do because idleness is forbidden. The community must be largely self-sufficient, producing its own food, clothing, and necessary goods. Today, let us imagine your assigned labor is in the gardens. You step outside through a side door of the cloister into the crisp morning air. The sun is low and bright, illuminating the white puffs of breath from your mouth as you sigh and gather a hoe and a basket. The tools are kept in a common shed. Nothing here truly belongs to you personally, not even the instruments of your work. The vow of poverty that you took means the monastery supplies all needed possessions, and you own no property of your own. Even the clothes you wear were provided by the abbey's storeroom. You own no money, no trinkets, absolutely nothing is personally yours. In accordance with the earliest monks' interpretation of Christ's teaching, to go, sell what you have, and give to the poor. If you ever receive a gift or coin from an outsider, which occasionally happens when a grateful visitor leaves something, you must surrender it to the abbot. Hiding it would be a serious offense. In fact, the abbot, or a designated monk, will periodically inspect each monk's meager belongings, and even search beds and storage places to ensure no one is hoarding anything in secret. The rule allows very little, perhaps a needle and thread to mend your robe, a knife for simple tasks, maybe a writing tablet, and some simple bedding. So, as you pick up the communal hoe, you think briefly of how nothing here is yours. Everything is ours, belonging to the brotherhood, or ultimately to God. Out in the kitchen garden, a patch of earth within the monastery walls, you set to work. The ground is hard with frost, and you rub your hands together for warmth before taking the hoe to break the soil. Your task this morning might be to turn over the earth in a plot to prepare it for spring planting, or to pull up the remains of last season's vegetables. Perhaps you are gathering winter kale or cabbages that can still survive the cold, or pruning the dormant fruit trees along the wall. As you labor, the cold air bites at your face and fingers, but soon the repetitive motion of digging and the little bit of exertion warms you up. Puffs of breath and the crunch of frozen earth are the only things breaking the silence. Another monk works alongside you, a few rows over. He catches your eye and offers a faint, encouraging smile, but neither of you speaks. It's not a strict silent period at this exact hour. When working outdoors, necessary speech is allowed, but generally idle chatter is discouraged at all times. Both of you keep focused on the task. In your mind, you might silently pray or recite a psalm to yourself as you work, making even labor into a form of devotion. Time passes, and the sun climbs a bit higher, taking some of the edge off the cold. Your stomach, however, starts to remind you of the fasting you're undergoing. On ordinary days outside of fasting seasons, monks typically eat 2 simple meals a day, one around midday and a lighter supper in the early evening. But during certain times of year, such as the weeks of Lent before Easter or Advent before Christmas, that routine changes. Often only 1 meal a day is taken, and even that is later in the day, usually not until evening. If this day we're imagining falls within Lent or another penitential season, you know you will have to toil on an empty stomach until the evening. Even on normal days, breakfast is not part of the schedule. You went to work with nothing more than perhaps a cup of weak beer or water to start the day, if that. The emptiness in your belly is meant to remind you to rely on spiritual nourishment and practice self-denial, but it's still an emptiness that growls and churns, no matter how pious one's intentions. As you dig your hoe into the earth, you can't help but daydream for a moment about the midday meal ahead. Perhaps there will be warm broth or a chunk of bread to savor. You quickly push the thought aside and murmur a quick prayer of thanks for having any food at all whenever it comes. The morning's work continues steadily. By mid-morning, the bell rings out once again, its clear note echoing over the fields and cloister. It is time for the third-hour prayer, called Terce, observed around 9 a.m. You wipe the dirt from your hands and clothes as best you can and set aside your tools. Work stops promptly. Everything in monastery life halts when the bell signals an hour of prayer. No matter how important the task, the work of God, Opus Dei, which is the liturgical prayer, takes precedence. You join the other monks trickling in from various duties, some from the kitchens, smelling of wood smoke and bread, others from the library dusted with a bit of parchment or ink on their fingers, and others from outside like you, boots caked in a little mud. Together you all reassemble in the church for Terce. Terce is brief, like Prime was, a few psalms, a short reading, and perhaps a hymn. The name Terce comes from the Latin for third hour after dawn, roughly corresponding to mid-morning. According to tradition, this hour commemorates the descent of the Holy Spirit at Pentecost, which is said to have happened at the third hour of the day. But for you on a daily basis, Terce is simply another pause to recenter on prayer. You stand there in the now sunlit church, noticing the dust motes floating in the air where sunbeams slant through the windows. With a clearer head than at dawn, thanks to the cold air and some exertion that woke you up, you find yourself chanting the Psalms with a bit more focus. The Latin prayers flow gently. The routine is so ingrained that you recite the words almost without thinking about them. They reside in your memory and on your tongue, even if your mind sometimes wanders to more mundane thoughts like the blister forming on your hand from the hoe or the ache in your lower back. As Terce concludes, you bow your head and try to muster genuine devotion, whispering a personal petition to accompany the formal prayers. Perhaps you ask for strength to get through the rest of the day without complaint, or you pray for a sick brother in the infirmary, or for the soul of some benefactor who died. After Terce, the monks convene in the chapter house for the daily chapter meeting. The chapter house is a chamber near the church, usually a smaller hall where the community gathers each day to listen to a reading of a chapter of the Rule of Saint Benedict, hence the name chapter meeting, and to discuss monastery business. You enter the chapter house along with everyone else and sit on one of the stone or wooden benches that line the walls. The abbot enters last, and everyone stands respectfully until he gestures for all to be seated. In this enclosed space, you can feel how unheated and chilly it is, though with many bodies gathered, it's slightly less biting than the cavernous church. The abbot, an older man with kind but weary eyes, begins by reading today's portion of the Rule of Saint Benedict. His voice is calm and deliberate as he recites the ancient guidelines that govern your lives. Today's chapter might be about humility, or the rules for mealtime, or the procedure for correcting a wayward brother. Every day, a bit of this foundational text is read aloud, reminding everyone of the ideals they're supposed to be living by. Then comes a more sobering part of the chapter meeting, addressing any breaches of discipline. The monastery thrives on strict order, and any disobedience or rule breaking is taken seriously. The monks have a practice of openly admitting their faults in these meetings. If you or any brother slipped in his duties, Say someone dozed off during Matins, or someone spoke out of turn or grumbled during work. Now is the time to confess and accept correction. It's an uncomfortable moment, but meant to foster humility. If you were the young monk who swayed during prayers last night, you might now kneel and softly say, "Bless me, Father, for I have sinned. I fell asleep during the sacred office." The abbot would then give a penance. Perhaps he instructs that monk to take his next meal on the floor of the refectory instead of at table, a mild humiliation to remind him to be vigilant, or to recite extra psalms in private. Another monk might confess that he spoke without permission while working. His penance might be to maintain complete silence for the rest of the day, not even using the usual hand signs for necessities. For more serious offenses, such as outright disobedience or quarreling, the punishments can be harsher, maybe a day on bread and water, or even a whipping administered privately. Corporal punishment is not unheard of in the cloister. The rule allows the rod for correcting persistent faults to be used with discretion. You've perhaps witnessed a brother being lashed a few times across the back in the secrecy of the chapter house for repeated infractions. It's done solemnly, as a supposed act of charity to save the monk's soul from damnation, but it's still painful and frightening to endure or even to watch. Severe or unrepentant offenders might even be confined to a small cell for a time, effectively a jail within the monastery. The mere possibility of these penances keeps most monks diligent and obedient. Fear and guilt are strong motivators in this life. After the chapter meeting concludes, the monks say a short prayer together and then proceed about their business. It is late morning now. If it's not a special feast day, you might have another work period before the main meal of the day. Suppose now you head to a different duty, perhaps copying manuscripts in the scriptorium. It is common for monks to rotate tasks or to assist where needed. You might spend part of the year mostly in the fields, but at other times, especially in winter, when farming slows, you might be assigned to indoor labors like copying texts or crafting candles. So now, you walk to the scriptorium, which is a chamber often adjacent to the library where writing is done. It's slightly less chilly there than outside, but still far from comfortable. In some monasteries, especially wealthier ones, there might be a small brazier or fireplace in the scriptorium to keep the ink from freezing and the fingers from stiffening, but generally the warmth is minimal. You sit at a wooden desk by a narrow window. The light is precious. There is no glass in the window, just a wooden shutter open to let in daylight. A biting draft comes with it, but the daylight is necessary to see your work. On the desk lies a piece of parchment, animal skin carefully prepared for writing, and quill pens and a pot of ink. Your task is to copy a portion of a manuscript, perhaps a religious text or a psalter, as accurately and neatly as you can. It's painstaking work. You dip the quill and begin lettering, the nib scratching faintly on the parchment. Each letter must be formed carefully in the prescribed style of script. A moment's distraction could lead to a mistake, a misspelled word, or a blot of ink, which might ruin the page or require an onerous correction. You have been trained in this skill, but that doesn't make it easy on the eyes or the back. As you hunch over the desk, the cold seeps into your fingers. After a short while, despite the early hour, your eyes feel strained from focusing on the fine details. You occasionally pause to flex your hand and blow on your fingertips for warmth. Your mind drifts as you copy line after line of Latin text. You recall that some scribes in the past left little notes in the margins of their work, a sign of the tedium and their humanity. One weary monk simply jotted that he was very cold. Another ended his copying with a half-joking plea for a drink, now that the work was done. You smile inwardly at these ancient voices whispering through time, relating to them as you shift on the hard bench and adjust your candle. Of course, you wouldn't dare add such casual comments in a sacred text yourself. Instead, you silently pray for patience and steady hands as you keep scraping away with your quill. Around midday, relief finally comes. The bell rings out once more, this time announcing Sext, the prayer of the 6th hour around noon, and with it the main meal of the day. You carefully blot the ink on your last line, set aside the parchment to dry, cover the ink pot to prevent spills, and rise from the desk, stretching your stiff back. Your stomach is definitely growling now. It has been many hours since you last ate, and the manual labor and cold have sharpened your hunger. The entire community gathers yet again in the church for Sext. It is a quick service, perhaps the shortest of the day, because the meal waits and stomachs are empty. Nonetheless, you all dutifully chant a few midday psalms, acknowledging the crucifixion of Christ, which according to tradition happened at the 6th hour of the day, a solemn reminder in the very middle of daily life of the sacrifice at the heart of your faith. Perhaps that reflection helps temper your hunger with a bit of spiritual perspective. When Sext is finished, the monks proceed to the refectory, the dining hall. At last it is time to eat. You file in and stand behind your assigned seat at the long wooden table. The refectory is a large, sparse hall with simple benches and tables. Today's meal is the first of the day, and for some monks it might be the only meal if it's a fast day. The smell of something warm, likely a vegetable stew, wafts through the air, making your mouth water. But discipline holds. No one sits or touches the food yet. First, a short grace is chanted by the prior or the refectorian, the monk in charge of the dining room, and all together you make the sign of the cross. Then at a signal, everyone sits at once. Eating in a monastery is not a time of social conversation. Silence is typically maintained even during meals, except for the voice of one monk reading aloud. As you settle onto the bench, a designated reader for the week stands at a lectern in the corner of the hall. He begins reading aloud from a book, often the Bible, or the life of a saint, or perhaps an edifying commentary, anything deemed spiritually beneficial. His voice echoes softly in the high-ceilinged hall. While he reads, the rest of you eat quietly, listening to the holy words mingling with the subtle sounds of clinking wooden spoons and pottery bowls. A lay brother or appointed server moves down the table with a ladle, serving each monk a portion of the day's meal. On a typical day, your bowl may be filled with a thick pottage of boiled beans or peas, with some onions and herbs, simple, hearty fare from the monastery's own gardens. Alongside it, you receive a hunk of coarse bread, likely made from the abbey's barley or rye flour. Each monk usually is allocated about a pound of bread per day in total, often divided between the two meals. You also have a cup of drink set before you, perhaps diluted wine or ale. The wine might be thin and sour from the monastery's vineyards if it has some, and the ale is weak, small ale, brewed on site because water alone is often unsafe, or simply to add some nourishment. The drink is moderate, just enough to quench thirst. The rule actually cautions against drinking much wine, but acknowledges the weakness of monks and permits a little. With your spoon, you taste the pottage. It is warm, which is a blessing on this chilly day, and it tastes of earthy legumes with a hint of salt and maybe garlic. There is no meat in it in most monastic orders. The rule forbids eating the flesh of four-legged animals, except for the ill. Meat was seen as an indulgence that could inflame passions, and was renounced as part of monastic austerity. However, fish is allowed, as are smaller animals like poultry in some places, so occasionally on a feast day, or if the monastery is wealthy, one might see some cooked fish or a bit of egg and cheese on the table. Today is an ordinary day, so your meal is meatless and basic. On very strict fasting days, even this might be reduced in quantity or missing the bread. But right now, as you eat the savory spoonfuls of bean stew and chew the dense bread, you are simply grateful. You make sure to eat slowly and thankfully, conscious of the virtue of temperance. Monks are warned never to appear gluttonous, no slurping or gorging, no reaching eagerly for more, moderation in all things, even in how you chew and sit. You notice a younger novice at the end of the table fidgeting. Perhaps his stomach still rumbles after finishing his portion, but he will learn over time to endure that little hunger quietly. As the reader continues, you catch snippets of the story he's reading, perhaps the life of a martyr enduring hardships for the faith. It puts your own small discomforts in perspective. You have a roof, food, and fraternity, whereas that saint suffered far worse. This is the sort of reflection the mealtime readings are meant to inspire. Before long, your bowl is empty, and your bread eaten. It wasn't a large meal, but it is enough to sustain you for now. You sit quietly, hands folded, until all have finished. The reader concludes his chapter and falls silent. The prior signals for the closing prayer. Altogether, you offer thanks to God for the meal. Then, at another sign, everyone rises from the benches. One by one, in order, the monks file out of the refectory. Any leftovers from the meal are promptly gathered. Nothing is wasted. What remains of the bread and stew will likely be taken to the almoner's room. The almoner is the monk who handles charity for the poor. At the gate of the monastery, a few beggars or poor families often wait around this time, hopeful for some charity. It's known that monasteries distribute food when they can. As you leave the dining hall, you glance toward the outer door and imagine the almoner or a lay brother handing those leftovers to thin, calloused hands outside. It gives you a quiet sense of purpose to know that even your humble meal has provided a portion for someone beyond the cloister. Monasteries see caring for the needy as part of their Christian duty. After all, the founder of your order, Saint Benedict, wrote that all guests and poor at the door should be received as Christ himself. So even as you live with little, the monastery tries to share that little with others. Similarly, your abbey maintains an infirmary where not only the monks, but sometimes local villagers receive care. The infirmarian, a monk skilled in the lore of herbs, grows healing plants like sage, feverfew, and mint in a small physic garden. If a brother is sick, he rests in a warm infirmary bed and receives remedies and broths. Occasionally, a seriously ill traveler or poor neighbor is quietly brought in and tended as well, in the spirit of mercy. You have assisted in that infirmary before, grinding herbs or simply praying by a bedside, and it gave you comfort to ease someone's suffering in this austere place. The monastery is also a place of learning. Young novices and oblates, boys given to the monastery, are taught their letters and Latin chants by experienced monks, just as you were once patiently taught by your elders. Sometimes, with the abbot's leave, a promising local youth might be allowed to join the monastic school for a time to learn reading and writing. In this way, the wisdom of books and the knowledge of healing are quietly cultivated here and occasionally shared with the outside world. Yet, these works of charity and education do not lessen the burdens of your own daily routine. They happen alongside your prayers and penances, not instead of them. No matter how many poor are fed or sick tended, you still must answer the midnight bell, still endure hunger and cold in pursuit of holiness. The monastery gives to others from its poverty, but each monk personally keeps to the path of sacrifice that makes such service possible. After lunch, it's early afternoon. The sun is at its zenith, bathing the cloister in a clear light. On some days, particularly in warmer seasons, monks might take a short rest or nap after the midday meal, a brief respite called the meridian. Given the pre-dawn start, a bit of drowsiness inevitably follows the meal. Today, you have perhaps a few minutes of free time before the next scheduled prayer. You return to the cloister and, seeing a patch of winter sun against the wall, you stand there for a moment, letting the light fall on your face. It is one of those small pleasures a monk learns to appreciate deeply: the simple warmth of sunlight, the beauty of a sparrow flitting under the eaves, or the quiet stillness after a meal. There might be no roaring firesides or rich desserts in your life, but there are moments of natural grace that fill the heart if one is attentive. Before long, the bell's clear tone rings out again. It is time for none, the ninth hour prayer, observed around the middle of the afternoon, about 3 p.m. Dutifully, you and your brothers assemble in the church once more. The sunlight slants lower now, coming in through the western windows this time, casting long shadows across the stone floor. None, like Terce and Sext, is a brief office, just a few psalms and prayers. Sometimes fatigue really sets in around this time. Your body is busy digesting the meal, and the early morning wake-up is catching up with you, but you stand straight and chant along. The psalms at none often speak of trust in God's help as the day wanes. You murmur the words, reflecting on how the day's burdens have so far been managed. After none, the work of the day resumes for a final stretch. Often, the later afternoon might be dedicated to quieter tasks or indoor work. Let's imagine you are sent to assist in the library now, organizing some books or copying a little more, or maybe you help in the sacristy polishing the brass candlesticks in preparation for Sunday's Mass. The sacristy, adjacent to the church, is where vestments and liturgical vessels are kept. Polishing candlesticks and chalices is tedious but necessary. As you rub a cloth over a metal chalice, you catch your reflection, a tired, tonsured man in a worn habit. Perhaps once you were a bright-eyed novice looking at the senior monks with awe. Now you see yourself as one of them. The thought crosses your mind. Is this it? Is this the life I will lead until I die? The answer, likely, is yes. And so you whisper a prayer. Lord, give me contentment and perseverance. Not all monasteries were alike. Your abbey's way of life may seem typical, but in truth, medieval monasteries varied widely. Some, like the great Abbey of Cluny, founded in early 900, grew exceedingly wealthy and ornate, with hundreds of monks chanting elaborate liturgies in a magnificent church. Others, like small rural priories, had only a handful of brothers living in dire poverty, scraping by with meager harvests. New reform orders emerged over time to recapture what they saw as the lost austerity. For example, in the year 1098, a group of monks left Cluny's influence to found Quito, becoming the Cistercians, white monks who rejected luxury, settled in remote swamps and forests, and toiled with their own hands to cultivate the land. There were also the hermit-like Carthusians, established in early 1100, each monk living mostly alone in a tiny cell, in silence and contemplation, far stricter than anything Benedict envisioned. The flavor of monastic life could differ, but no form was easy or indulgent. Wherever the rule was truly kept, monks rose before dawn, renounced comfort, and followed the same core vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience. To be sure, not all lived up to the ideal. There were abbots who grew too fond of fine food or influence, and monasteries that became lax or worldly. Tales spread of certain monks enjoying soft living, hunting with hounds, or feasting against their vows. Such hypocrisy drew criticism and sometimes intervention from church authorities. Yet even in those places, the ordinary monk in the cloister still had to attend Matins at midnight, still had to fast and labor as the rule required. The institution might drift at times, but the individual monk remained bound to his daily discipline. And inevitably, when a monastic community strayed too far into comfort, a new wave of reform would call it back to simplicity. The world around the cloister was changing as well. In your own lifetime, you might have heard distant news of men like Francis of Assisi, who in early 1200 wandered barefoot, preaching and serving the poor without ever taking monastic enclosure. These mendicant friars represent a new approach, bringing the spirit of the monastery into the towns and roads without walls. Some of your brothers regard this development with curiosity, others with concern, wondering if the friars will complement or undermine the work of cloistered monks. And a few centuries from now, even greater changes will come. The Protestant Reformation in late 1500 will unleash a storm of criticism against monastic life, leading to the closure of many abbeys, especially in northern lands. Kings will seize monastery lands, and ancient cloisters like yours will be dissolved or repurposed. But all of that lies far in the future, beyond anything you can imagine on this quiet night. For you now, the monastic way of life continues as it has for generations, steady, sheltered, and largely unchanged by the outside world. As evening approaches, the end of the monk's workday nears. The bell rings to summon everyone for Vespers, the evening prayer service. You and your fellow monks gather in the church with the setting sun's light glowing through the westward windows. Vespers is one of the pivotal hours of the day, second only to Matins in length and importance. It's a time to give thanks for the day that is ending and to reflect as darkness falls. The psalms of Vespers are sung in full, voices a bit more spirited now that the day's labors are nearly done. You all stand to sing the Magnificat, Mary's song of praise, at the heart of Vespers. Candles are lit, and perhaps incense is gently burned, sending sweet curls of smoke up into the dusk. My soul magnifies the Lord, you all chant together, and you feel a quiet joy flicker inside you, despite your fatigue. When Vespers concludes, the monks take a light supper if the rule and season permit. In summer, an additional small meal is often allowed, some bread, maybe a bit of cheese or fruit, since the days are long and the labor hard. In winter or on fasting days, however, no supper is taken, and the monks continue in prayer and silence without further food. Let's say tonight is winter, and you have no second meal. The one meal at noon will sustain you until tomorrow's midday. Instead of eating, you might spend a short time reading or walking quietly in the cloister as the last daylight fades. Before the final prayer of the day, some monks slip into the kale factory, the one heated room of the monastery, to warm themselves. You join them briefly. A cheerful fire crackles in a stone hearth, and a dozen monks huddle around it in the dim room. You hold your hands out to the flames, feeling blissful relief as sensation returns to your fingertips. Faces that looked drawn and pale in the cold now glow softly in the firelight. No words are spoken. The great silence of night will soon begin, but a few contented sighs and coughs mingle with the pop of burning logs. You close your eyes for a moment, savoring the warmth and the companionship. In this simple scene around the fire, you feel a quiet camaraderie with your brothers, all of you having survived another day of prayer and toil, now sharing a brief comfort. At length, the final bell of the day rings, gentle but clear, calling all to Compline, the last prayer service of the day. Night has fully fallen. The church is lit by lamplight and a few candles as the monks assemble one final time. Compline is said just before retiring and is meant to be a soothing penitential end to the day. The prayers focus on asking forgiveness for any sins committed during the day and seeking God's protection through the night. The atmosphere is calm and reflective. Everyone is tired. Voices are soft and muted. You might sing a psalm like, "In peace I will lie down and sleep. For you alone, O Lord, make me dwell in safety." The Latin Compline hymn and prayers like the Salve Regina to the Virgin Mary bring a sense of gentle closure. One line from the prayers strikes you deeply each night. May the all-powerful Lord grant us a restful night and a peaceful death. It's a stark reminder of mortality at the close of each day, but delivered in a tone of trust and surrender. At Compline's conclusion, the abbot gives a final blessing. In some monasteries, there's a tradition now of the monks exchanging a sign of peace or asking silent forgiveness from each other for any offense during the day. Perhaps you and the monk beside you share a humble bow. With that, the great silence officially begins. From now until morning, not a word will be spoken. You extinguish most candles, and by the dim light of one or two lamps, the community files out of the church. Back through the cloister you go, retracing the same steps you took at midnight, but in reverse, your day of prayer now complete. The cloister garden is silvered by moonlight. As you pass, the air is cold and still. One by one, the monks enter the dormitory, each finding his bed in the darkness with practiced ease. You sit on your straw mattress and remove your sandals, placing them neatly by the wall. Unlike in modern times, there are no nightclothes. You will sleep in your habit, with perhaps an extra blanket if it's very cold. You do take off your leather belt and set it aside. In the silence, all you hear is the rustling of robes and straw mattresses as everyone settles in. Before lying down, you take a moment to kneel beside your bed. In the near total dark, you bow your head and say a final private prayer. It might be as simple as whispering, "Thank you, Lord, for carrying me through this day," or repeating part of Compline's final blessing, "May Almighty God grant us a restful night and a peaceful end." You make the sign of the cross over yourself. Despite all your imperfections, you have made it through the day in service of God, and for that you are grateful. Finally, you ease onto your bed. The straw mattress crunches softly under your weight. It's not particularly soft. You can feel the wooden boards beneath in places, but at this moment it feels heavenly to your weary body. You draw your wool blanket up around you. The dormitory has no heating, so your breath is visible in the faint light, but your body soon generates a little warmth under the covers. You adjust your cowl over your shaved head to keep the chill off. All around, your brothers are doing the same, cocooning themselves as best they can against the long winter night. It's early evening by modern standards, perhaps around 8 o'clock, but the monks have been awake and active since midnight, and exhaustion makes it easy to fall asleep this early. Lying on your back, you take a moment to reflect on the day. This is something many monks do, an examination of conscience of sorts, thinking of anything that needs forgiveness or any blessings to thank for. You recall how difficult it was to wake in the cold of night, how at one point you nearly nodded off in the scriptorium, how you quietly grumbled in your mind about the blandness of lunch. You offer these small failings to God in repentance. You also recall moments of grace, the beauty of the chant at Vespers, the smile from the old gardener monk, the taste of warm soup when you were hungriest. Deo gratias, you whisper. Thanks be to God. In the silence, your mind drifts over the day's events, the midnight prayers, the tasks, the small frustrations, the brief moments of beauty. Perhaps you remember the warmth of the sun on your face in the afternoon, or the sound of the Vespers hymn echoing. Perhaps a twinge of guilt surfaces because during the work you caught yourself envying the lay brothers who have slightly more freedom, or the outside peasants who seemed carefree. You mentally push that away and remind yourself of the commitment you've made. There are always trade-offs. While you gave up personal freedom and comfort, you gained a structured life aimed at holiness and freed from many worldly dangers. Outside, a peasant might enjoy more spontaneity, but he also faces uncertainty, failed crops, looming war, oppressive lords. In here, your life is secure and purposeful, if hard. A soft wind howls outside the dormitory's small windows. The night is dark and perhaps a bit stormy. You hear the patter of a cold rain beginning to fall, drops tapping on the roof. You're grateful the roof is sound. In some poorer monasteries, it might leak, but here the buildings are maintained as well as resources allow. The thought comes unbidden. If you were out in the world, On a night like this, you could be in a cottage by the fire, with family around you. That image of domestic comfort, a loving spouse, children laughing, a hearth, it was never to be for you. You gave all that up. Some days you hardly think of it. Other days the sacrifice is tangible. But then you recall why you did it. Maybe as a youth you truly felt called by God. Or perhaps you were an oblate given to the monastery as a child, in which case you didn't choose. But later, at maturity, you still took the vows, sealing that path. If you had left, what would you have done? Possibly become a tradesman or a soldier. But here at least you are assured of sustenance and a chance to devote your life to higher pursuits. You remember with clarity the day you finally professed your solemn vows. It was in early autumn, a few years after you had entered as a novice. You lay prostrate on the abbey church's stone floor, arms outstretched in the shape of a cross, while the brethren chanted the litany of the saints around you. The chill of the flagstones seeped through your habit, and your heart fluttered with a mix of holy fear and resolve. When you rose, you spoke your vows in a steady voice, promising stability in this community, conversion of your ways to a monastic life, and obedience. By these you embraced poverty and chastity as well, renouncing personal wealth and marriage for all your days. The abbot draped a black cowl over you, the garment of a fully professed monk, and you remember how its heavy wool felt like both a burden and a shelter as it settled on your shoulders. One by one, the monks came forward and offered you the kiss of peace. In that moment, you felt an overwhelming peace and purpose, convinced you were exactly where you were meant to be. It was a kind of spiritual rebirth. Whenever you struggle now, you draw strength from that memory, recalling the purity of intention and fervor you felt on the day you made your lifelong promise. Not all in the monastery are equally content. You know of a couple of monks who often need to be corrected for minor sloth or disobedience. Their hearts seem restless. There are whispers that one of them tried to run away last year, but was caught on the road and brought back by local villagers who know that a runaway monk is a serious matter. He spent a week in solitary penance and since then has been quiet. You wonder what inner struggles he had, perhaps missing a woman he loved, or simply the pull of freedom too strong to resist. The rule calls such a monk a gyrovague if he keeps wandering, and it condemns that instability. Stability, staying put in one community, is a Benedictine virtue. You have planted your roots here, and you intend by God's grace to bloom here and eventually die here. Indeed, you picture the monastery's little cemetery out back, simple crosses marking where generations of monks lie. One day, not terribly far off in the grand scheme, you will join them. Maybe it will be after a long old age of copying books and tending the sick in the infirmary. Older monks often do lighter tasks. Or perhaps illness or accident could take you sooner. An outbreak of plague or a misstep and fall from a ladder could end things abruptly. But these thoughts don't frighten you the way they might some. Monks are constantly reminded of death as a natural passage. Memento mori is part of the ethos. In fact, Compline always ended with the ante your hands. Lord, I commend my spiritum meum. Into your hands, Lord, I commend my spirit. The very words of a dying saint. So, living as a monk is like daily practice for a good death. Each night you symbolically lay yourself down in God's care, as if one of these nights you will wake, not to the monastery bell, but to the trumpet of angels. And if you've been faithful, hopefully that final awakening will be in heavenly light. These somber yet peaceful thoughts lull you further. All around, the dormitory is quiet, except for the soft breathing and occasional cough of your brothers. Someone shifts in his sleep, the straw rustling. From far off you hear the faint toll of a town bell or a dog barking. The sounds carry in the open countryside, but they are muffled by the rain, now drumming steadily. The world around the cloister was changing as well. In your own lifetime, you might have heard distant news of men like Francis of Assisi, who in early 1200 wandered barefoot, preaching and serving the poor without ever taking monastic enclosure. These mendicant friars represent a new approach, bringing the spirit of the monastery into the towns and roads, without walls. Some of your brothers regard this development with curiosity, others with concern, wondering if the friars will complement or undermine the work of cloistered monks. And a few centuries from now, even greater changes will come. The Protestant Reformation in late 1500 will unleash a storm of criticism against monastic life, leading to the closure of many abbeys, especially in northern lands. Kings will seize monastery lands, and ancient cloisters like yours will be dissolved or repurposed. But all of that lies far in the future, beyond anything you can imagine on this quiet night. For you now, the monastic way of life continues as it has for generations, steady, sheltered, and largely unchanged by the outside world. In centuries to come, people will look back at monks like you with a mixture of admiration and pity, even criticism. They might idolize the beautiful ruins of monasteries, imagining peaceful scholarly monks, forgetting the toil and tedium, or they might scorn the corruption that did exist in some abbeys, forgetting the sincere devotion of most monks. But lying here, none of that matters. You are just a man who made vows and tried to keep them one more day, and now your day is done. The rain outside has tapered to a gentle patter. The darkness in the dormitory is complete, save a tiny glow from the ember of the night lamp. Your breathing slows, matching the steady rhythm of the sleeping community around you. In a few hours, that bell will ring and demand everything of you again: your sleep, your warmth, your voice, your concentration. But for now, it's blissfully silent. Allow yourself, as you imagine this scene, to feel the weight of the monk's exhaustion and the relief of surrendering to rest. Though our lives today are very different, we all know something of work, of duty, and of seeking peace at day's end. Now, in this shared quiet moment across time, you too can let go of the day's labors. Picture the stone walls of the abbey dissolving into the darkness, the echo of chants receding into a comforting hum. The cold, hard edges of that life soften into the warm embrace of sleep. You are safe, you are at rest, and the troubles of both the medieval monk and your own modern day can fade away. Now, let go of any lingering thoughts. Feel the weight of this day, with all its busyness and concerns, gently melt away from your shoulders. Close your eyes if you haven't already, and take a slow, deep breath in and out. Allow each breath to carry you further into calm. The monk in our story is asleep now, and you too can safely surrender to rest. There is nothing you need to do at this moment, nowhere you need to be, except here, easing into sleep. Feel your body sinking into your bed, every muscle relaxing, from the top of your head to the soles of your feet. Release any remaining tension. Let the hush of the monastery's night enfold you like a warm cloak. The distant echoes of chants and bells have faded. Only tranquility remains. You are at peace, cradled in the same gentle night that once comforted those weary monks after their long days. As you drift off, know that across time and space, many souls have found rest in moments like this, in quiet surrender when the day is done. In this shared silence, you are connected to them, and you are safe. Let sleep come softly, like a kindly visitor, closing the great wooden doors of consciousness for now. May your dreams be calm and your sleep be healing. Good night, and God bless.